to have you up for confirmation for this position, which has become very politically charged in a way I lament. It should not have been, but unfortunately, the past archivists have done what they've done. The FBI has done what it has done. DOJ has done what they have done. And here you are talking about the anti-intellectualism and, frankly, stupidity of American voters.
Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with you, Shogun, if I could. You have talked throughout today's hearing so far and in your pre-hearing Q&A about how much it's important to be a nonpartisan leader. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And so if you're confirmed, you will attempt to stay politically neutral in your decision-making. Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator.
Fair characterization of your views, I should say.
Yes, yes.
So I was troubled, I have to say, by this article that you wrote that Senator Portman asked you about a minute ago, published by the American Political Science Association. I have it here, Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism, published in June of 2007. Do you consider this piece to be nonpartisan?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I consider it to be an academic article, publication of 16, 17 years ago, a scholarly piece.
Yeah, let's dig into it a little bit. You write in your paper that to combat allegations of elitism, recent Republican presidents have adopted anti-intellectualism. Mm-hmm. How would you define anti-intellectualism?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. The ability to speak in very plain, common sense terms to Americans.
So you say recent Republican presidents, but your case studies are Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan, mm-hmm. and then coming up, I think, to George W. Bush. So what's the point here? I mean, you say at one point, Republicans tend to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities. Democrats, on the other hand, coalesce on the intellectual tail of the continuum. So is the point that Republicans are stupid and Democrats are intellectual?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. Absolutely not. The point of the article is that the presidents that I featured in it have a rhetorical connection with the American people.
A rhetorical connection that you say is anti-intellectual, and you feature every two-term Republican president, going back to Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, Senator, I think it's a piece on rhetoric, and it is really looking at how these presidents have been successful rhetorically in their arguments.
Interesting. It's a piece on rhetoric, but you attribute part of the anti-intellectualism of the Republican Party to, in your words, the rise of the religious right. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. Is it because those voters are stupid?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Absolutely not. And if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I look forward to welcoming all Americans to the National Archives.
So do you think that people who voted for Donald Trump are anti-intellectual?
Thank you, Senator. I would not make any judgment on the people who voted for President Trump or any other president.
So you don't think the people who voted for Dwight Eisenhower or Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush, they weren't anti-intellectual? The anti-intellectual rhetoric just appealed to them because what? What's your theory?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. As I said, presidents are able to speak in common sense, plain terms to Americans that they understand.
So you characterize President Reagan as having, quote, less than impressive intellectual capacities. You said President Eisenhower and Bush were decidedly intellectual. You said Reagan engaged in intellectual posturing. Let's just start with the first one, less than impressive intellectual capacities. So in other words, it's dumb.
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely not. That was a perception, and it was cited.
I'm sorry, it's a perception by whom? By you? You wrote about it.
No, Senator. That was, and as I said, in the article, that is a perception, but actually in the article, because...
You say Reagan's less than impressive intellectual capacities have been widely discussed. Mm-hmm. That's presented as a factual statement. Mm-hmm. You don't even cite for it. Mm-hmm. This is on page 298. I have your article. Don't dissemble in front of me. Mm-hmm. So Reagan's less than impressive intellectual capacities have been widely discussed. Mm-hmm. You're not saying that he had less than... That's not your view?
Thank you, Senator. It is not my view.
Why did you write it?
Thank you, Senator. That is not my view. My view was focused on his rhetorical capability.
That's not what your sentence says. Listen, you wrote an article saying basically that Republican voters are stupid, that Republican presidents deliberately appeal to anti-intellectualism. You rolled it all up in this thing called Republican populism, yet you're trying to present yourself here as a nonpartisan. In fact, you're an extreme partisan, and your record shows that. You're someone who has denigrated Republican presidents, every two-term Republican president, I hope I'm not leaving anybody out, that has, since the Second World War, and their voters in this lengthy article. I mean, I just don't understand. If you wrote it, why won't you stand behind it?
Thank you, Senator. I will stand by my long experience for over 15 years of nonpartisan service.
You know, this is not just a theoretical set of questions, because as you know, we have seen what happens when you have political activists in the position that you are up for confirmation for. And we are living through that as a nation right now. We are living through the weaponization, the political weaponization of the National Archives, the political weaponization of the Department of Justice, the political weaponization of the FBI, such that half of the people of this country cannot trust those institutions. We're living with a president who calls half the voters of this country semi-fascists, who have said that they are a threat to democracy. This is an elected American president who makes these outrageous, outrageous statements. So in that environment, frankly, to have you up for confirmation for this position, which has become very politically charged, in a way I lament. It should not have been, but unfortunately, the past archivists have done what they've done. The FBI has done what it has done. DOJ has done what they have done. And here you are talking about the anti-intellectualism and, frankly, stupidity of American voters. I mean, if that isn't plain to type, I don't know what that world is. I mean, it's basically a self-parody. How can you assure me, or anybody watching this hearing, the millions of Americans, 75 million Americans who voted for a Republican in the last election, how can you assure them that you will be truly nonpartisan, given what you have said over a period of years?
Yes. Thank you, Senator. I stand by my record of nonpartisan service at the Congressional Research Service, the Library of Congress, and at the White House Historical Association. And I invite anybody to talk to the people that I have worked with for years in my nonpartisan government service.
Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to enter this article, Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. I'd like to enter it into the record.
Without objection.
I'd invite everybody to read this. You can read the words for yourselves. You can read the entire article for yourselves, and folks can make up their own minds. I think when they do, they'll be really disappointed. I'm deeply disappointed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Acting Ranking Member Senator Langford, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Just the fill-in guide today on this one as well. Ranking Member Portman, thank you for your leadership in the committee as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the hearing. And again, thank you to all the witnesses today for the process. I do want to follow up what Ranking Member Portman was talking about on the Equal Rights Amendment. Dr. Shogun, during your process in your consideration as a nominee, did anyone from the Biden administration ask you about your stand on the ERA, what your position was on that in the approval process? And if so, what was that conversation?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I was not asked that question during the process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your very clear statements, both to our staff in writing and to Senator Portman, that the issue with the ERA is settled by the federal courts or by Congress, not by the archivist, or the archivist, as you say on it, either way. So we want to make that very clear, because obviously there are members of Congress that have disagreement on that. The previous archivist disagreed and said, no, this is not the role of the archivist to unilaterally make that decision. You've obviously agreed with that publicly, and I appreciate your engagement on that. You and I have spoken before about a warning label that is currently on our founding documents, that is actually on every document that is digitized in the National Archives. And the consideration, it warns Americans or anyone reading our documents that there's potentially harmful content, that this content could be offensive to individuals, that whether it's the United States Constitution or whether it's autopsy photos from World War II, it doesn't matter, it's on everything, as that warning piece on that banner on it. My question to you in our conversation was, I don't want it to be misunderstood in any way, that the National Archives could consider the United States Constitution a potentially offensive document, which clearly it's a founding document, it's not offensive. There are bits of our history that all of us as Americans look back on and are embarrassed who we were as Americans and decisions that we have made. We don't always get it right over our history, but we are working to make a more perfect union. But all of our history is our history. The important thing to me is there's never a warning on a single document, and that we reconsider labeling some of our documents offensive when there just are history on this. So as you and I have spoken about this before, my challenge is to be able to review that warning, to be able to determine what's the best way to be able to do it, what's appropriate to be able to get to parents, to say if your children are looking at all these things, there are photos that are gruesome photos from World War II, for instance, of the battlefield and the Civil War that are painful to be able to view, especially as a child. But there's also important national documents that are here. How do you plan to be able to handle this offensive label and this warning?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. You are correct. When there is a search done in the archives, the online archives catalog, there is language that makes users aware that they may inadvertently come across content that could be difficult to view. As we talked about yesterday in your office, I am primarily concerned about, if I am confirmed as archivist, I want more teachers and students to use the National Archives. If you have to do a history project on World War II or World War I, we want you to come to the National Archives and use that catalog to find those primary sources. And as you know, kids are excellent searchers today. They're better searchers than we are. So when they look for those relevant documents, they could easily jump to something else inadvertently. And so that's why that language is there. But as we talked about yesterday, I am absolutely willing to come and talk to you about that language, and we can review it together and move forward.
Okay, thank you. As you and I both know, being around teenagers, all you have to do is put a warning that this could be offensive, and that makes them search it more, as you also know. So that's another issue we need to evaluate, and just evaluate what the effectiveness of this is, to have a warning label on it, if that's really accomplishing anything on it, other than just being a distraction. You and I also spoke about the raid that happened in Mar-a-Lago, former President Trump's private residence, and going through those documents. In an unusual situation, it wasn't just the FBI carrying out the raid, but it was the request of the National Archives to be able to engage with these records and then trigger something with the FBI. Typically, this would be a voluntary conversation. It's my understanding that you've had dialogue with our staff to say all of your preferences, any disagreements in this document, this should be a voluntary conversation rather than a legal conversation or a raid. A raid of a former president's house is unprecedented, and it puts the entire process on full display to be able to say, how does this happen? Why does this happen? Everyone gets questions on it. So my first question is, should this be a voluntary cooperation rather than a legal raid with a search warrant coming into a private residence?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. I want to be clear that as the nominee for this position, I have not been briefed on any of the details of what has happened, so I have no information about those decisions or the sequence of events. But as I understand it, when there is some concern about missing or damaged records in general at the National Archives, at that point in time, the records, to retrieve the records, there is a voluntary exchange of communication with those individuals. And as I understand it, once again, I don't have any past knowledge of this, the vast majority of the time the records are recovered and retrieved.
Right. This is unprecedented for a former president, obviously, to be able to go through this. The reason I ask you is because that has now set a new precedent that going forward, this is going to be the new standard for every president after this. And so this starts a very different process that we're trying to evaluate. The second part of my question on this is, this is the National Archives, the keeper of all records on this. Now the email chains, the conversations, any notes that were done for the National Archives in their communication with the FBI about this now become national historical records and are not only important to be able to maintain and to be able to protect, but also for the visibility of this committee as well. It's the reason that Senator Scott and I have both reached out to this committee to be able to say, we need to be able to talk about this because there was something entirely new that was just created by the National Archives and the FBI in searching a former president's house. Will you agree to, in the future, making records available at the National Archives to be able to show what the process was and the decision-making was to be able to reach to this point so that I have greater transparency for the American people?
Yes. Thank you, Senator, for that question. Yes, I believe that transparency with this committee, I want to be responsive to requests if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States. Once again, I do want to state I don't know where we are in this Department of Justice law enforcement process. But as a general statement, Senator, you have my commitment that I will work with you and members of this committee to be as transparent as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Ossoff, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I know you touched on this issue a moment ago. I want to raise it again with you, Dr. Shogun. That's the backlog in military service records. Veterans across Georgia, across the country, are deeply frustrated by the interminable delays accessing their military records. And they need these records for their VA health care benefits. They need these records for their employment and educational benefits. I introduced last week the Bipartisan Access for Veterans to Records Act to try to address this backlog so that veterans in Georgia and across the country can access their records. If confirmed, will you commit to working with me to eliminate the backlog of military service records requests at NPRC, and not just to working with me, but to putting it at the very top of your agenda?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. It is at the very top of my agenda if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States. And in fact, if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I will make my first trip as Archivist of the United States to St. Louis, to the NPRC, so I can meet once again with the leadership there and the hardworking staff that are attempting to reduce the backlog. There has been great progress made thus far. And I look forward to finding creative solutions within federal law and regulations in order to reduce that backlog at a faster pace.
I appreciate that commitment, Dr. Shogun. And making that commitment here today will mean a lot to veterans in Georgia who frankly are skeptical after years of dealing with this that there can be a change. But there must be a change. Veterans deserve timely access to their records. And I'm going to ask for a further commitment, which is that once you have had the opportunity to meet again with the folks at the NPRC and to get your bearings in your first 4 or 5 weeks in office, should you be confirmed, that you will timely submit to this committee your assessment of the drivers of this backlog and a specific plan to eliminate it. Will you make that commitment?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I am willing to make that commitment. I will make myself available, what I've learned. And just a further comment on that, I mean, obviously the first thing that has to be done if I'm confirmed as Archivist is removing the backlog. But there has to be a second step, which is to make sure that backlog is not created in future circumstances. We hope that the pandemic is over, but we can never predict what is coming down the road in the future. So I believe there has been great progress by the Department of Veterans Affairs in moving to digitize those records in a timely fashion and in a reasonable priority. And once those records are digitized and placed in the cloud, then NPRC staff will be able to access them, and I think the requests will be processed much faster in the future. So I think there's a good end to this story if we can get there.
Thank you, Dr. Shogun. I understand there is also a backlog of immigration-related record requests known as A-files managed by NARA. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, Senator, I am in a briefing document. I'm not intimately familiar, but I am aware of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask as well that, and we can have our teams work together to define a specific deadline for this. But that should you be confirmed, similarly, once you've had the opportunity to assess in detail the nature of that challenge, that you'll submit to the committee a proposal for addressing that backlog. Will you make that commitment?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I am willing to follow up and make that commitment.
I appreciate that. You, of course, are familiar with this from some of your past work, but you will have some cybersecurity challenges to manage should you be confirmed, particularly as more records are digitized. How are you thinking about handling the threats to cybersecurity that will present themselves at the National Archives?
Yes, thank you for that question. As I am aware that there has been an Inspector General, an IG report for the National Archives concerning cybersecurity, and I would plan to review that report and find out firsthand what is being done to address those issues or concerns in a timely fashion.
Okay, well, I know that the chairman and members of this committee are deeply concerned with cybersecurity for federal agencies, so please let us know what resources or authorities may be helpful should you be confirmed for that mission. Finally, I want to bring to your attention something that is of deep and particular concern to my constituents in Georgia and a particular concern across the American South. And that is the disposition of civil rights cold cases. The lynchings, the murders, the abductions that took place in the Jim Crow era and before in the state of Georgia and across the South, for which there has never been justice. And the descendants of those who were murdered, who are still crying out for justice. I have introduced the Bipartisan Civil Rights Cold Case Records Review Board Support Act, and I'd like your commitment to work with my office, to work with that Cold Case Record Review Board to make every resource at NARA available to pursue the truth and to pursue justice for those who were lynched, for those who were abducted, for those who were assaulted in the state of Georgia, across the South, and across the country, and ensure that our quest for justice is not abandoned. Will you make that commitment?
Yes, Senator, I look forward to working with you and your staff on this issue, if I am confirmed.
Thank you, Dr. Shogan. It's really important, and I appreciate your testimony today. I appreciate the rest of the panel. Congratulations for the nominations, and I yield.